London, May 19, 1536. The first light of dawn struck the cold stone walls of the Tower of London. A grey sky spread over the city like a heavy omen of what was to come. Even the birds seemed silenced. In the courtyard rose a scaffold, hastily built through the night. But this was no ordinary platform. This was the stage for England's first queen to be executed. Every plank, every step designed to prove that death was not only a punishment, but also a theater. On this day, the woman who had changed the destiny of England, Anne Boleyn, was to lose her head. The second wife of King Henry VIII, the queen who had stirred storms at the very heart of the throne, would now be forced to kneel before the people like a criminal. But this execution was not merely death. It was an erasure of memory. Henry's goal went beyond destroying Anne's body. He sought to erase her name, her legacy, her place in history, so that generations to come would not remember her as a threat. When Anne Boleyn entered the Tower, she was not a criminal, she was still a queen. Just 3 years earlier, she had been crowned in Westminster Abbey with great ceremony. That day she had been hailed before the nation as England's new hope. But now, those same stone walls had become her prison. For 17 days she listened for the footsteps of her executioner each morning. Her death was announced, delayed, then announced again. Each postponement forced her to die anew. This uncertainty was not only captivity, it was a slow, calculated psychological torture. Even in arranging her execution, Henry chose theater. Instead of the traditional English acts, he summoned a special executioner from France. The man carried a sword, meant to sever the head with a single stroke. Henry presented this as an act of mercy. But in truth, even this detail was part of the performance. Anne's death would not be a routine blow of the axe. It would be a spectacle. But during those 17 days, Anne's mind also wandered through the memories of a lifetime. She had been born around 1501 in Norfolk, and as a young girl was sent to the French court. There she was educated, learning grace, languages, dance, and diplomacy. Her years in France shaped her, setting her apart from English women, making her intelligent, cultured, and irresistibly charming. When she served as lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon, the young King Henry VIII quickly noticed her. Yet and refused his early advances. She would not settle for being just another mistress. Her condition was clear, either marriage, or nothing at all. That defiance changed the course of English history. To marry her, Henry broke from Rome. He defied the Catholic Church and created the Church of England. In this great break, and became more than a woman, she became the figure who altered the religious and political destiny of the nation. In 1533 she was crowned queen at Westminster Abbey. That day marked the height of her triumph. But behind the crown lay a heavy burden: to give Henry a male heir. Her first child was Elizabeth. Elizabeth would one day become one of the greatest queens in history. But at that time, to Henry, she was nothing but a disappointment. Anne's later miscarriages sealed her fate. Her enemies grew inside the court. Some saw her as arrogant, others as ruthless. The people still loved Catherine of Aragon, and had never managed to become the people's queen. At last, the shadow of Jane Seymour fell upon her. Henry's eyes turned to another woman. Anne's downfall was now inevitable. Witnesses wrote that in her final days and displayed a strange cheerfulness. She joked, even smiled. Modern psychologists would call this dissociation, the mind's attempt to protect itself by detaching from unbearable fear and pain. But behind the mask was unspeakable terror, and was accused of adultery, incest, even conspiring to kill the king. She knew the evidence was false. What she was truly punished for was wounding the pride of a king, for she had failed to give Henry a male heir. Instead, she had given him only little Elizabeth. Perhaps Anne's only comfort was her little daughter. Yet in a cruel twist of fate, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate at the age of 3, and after her mother's death, she became little more than a shadow in the royal court. On the morning of May 19th, nature seemed to mock human tragedy. London shone under an unusually bright light. Anne had not slept through the night. She had prayed, devoting her final hours to God. As she walked to her death, she passed through the same corridors she once strode as a queen. But this time, the soldiers at her side offered no respect, only indifference. Queen Anne was now nothing more than and the condemned. The scaffold had been built deliberately low, just 3 steps high. The purpose was clear: to strip her of majesty, to make her ordinary in the eyes of the crowd. The spectators were forced to witness her fall with their own bare eyes. Queens were granted the right to speak before their execution. Anne's words were recorded. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die. By the law I am judged to death, and therefore I will not speak against the accusations. I pray God save the king and give him long to reign." On the surface, it sounded like submission, but in truth, it was a clever refusal. She never confessed guilt, she simply pointed to the law that had condemned her. Henry himself was not there. He was in another palace, already preparing his new marriage, waiting coldly for Anne's death from afar. Anne knelt. A cloth was tied around her eyes, not for mercy, but to keep her from moving in fear. Her lips moved silently in prayer. The French executioner swiftly raised his sword. One stroke, and the queen's head fell to the ground. Witnesses claimed that for a few seconds after the blow, Anne's eyes still blinked, her lips still moved. Perhaps she was trying to finish her prayer. Perhaps consciousness still clung to the body for a brief moment. In the crowd, some women fainted. Some men turned their faces away. But the deed was done. The queen was no more. No coffin was prepared for Anne. Her attendants, desperate, found an old arrow chest. Her body and head were placed inside and buried in an unmarked grave within the chapel of the tower. She was treated not as a queen, but as a problem to be disposed of. Immediately after her death, by the king's order, her portraits were taken down. Her name was erased from official records. Her emblems were scraped off the palace walls. The goal was clear: to destroy Anne Boleyn not only in body, but in history itself. But history often carries irony. Henry's greatest fear came true. Anne's daughter Elizabeth would one day rise to become one of the greatest monarchs England had ever known. And the throne, stained with her mother's blood, would witness a golden age. Anne's name was not forgotten as Henry had wished. On the contrary, her tragedy became a symbol of power, of gender, and of political manipulation. Even today, Anne's story is remembered not merely as an execution, but as a state-orchestrated assassination of character. When Anne's head fell, it was not only a woman who was severed. England's conscience was struck down with her. Her tragedy, even after 500 years, reminds us of this truth. History is often written not with the sword, but with the pen, not with force, but with manipulation. And it is women who most often pay the highest price for that writing. Anne Boleyn's voice was silenced. Yet her story still echoes through the stone walls of the Tower of London.